that Christians have been expelled from cities, from Homs in particular, in Syria. This, for me, is deja vu with Iraq, because Iraq had 1.3 million Christians before the war, and now it's down to maybe 100, 200,000. They've fled all over the world and all across the region. Are we seeing the beginning of what's going to become a very nasty sectarian fight as Assad falls?
I believe that to be the case, especially with relatively weak international elements intervening in whatever ways they deem appropriate to balance the other side of the equation. I mean, you've talked pretty clearly about the dangers coming in from Iran, Al-Qaeda operating regionally. We've talked previously about the role Russia plays. I mean, the other side of this ledger is powerful, active, and if there aren't serious balances going in from allied forces, including some efforts of our own, then I think this civil and sectarian strife will expand, become more dangerous.
Hey, Stephen, this is Amy Holmes here. American troops are in Iraq. Al-Qaeda creates chaos, violence, conflict, civil war. U.S. troops leave. Al-Qaeda creates chaos, conflict, tries to provoke a civil war. What should the United States position be in this region of the world where it seems that this Islamic, radical, militant, violent, murderous group is so determined? I mean, there's a quote from one of its leaders, the head of the Islamic State of Iraq, who says, quote, "The majority of the Sunnis in Iraq support al-Qaeda and are waiting for its return." Where does the U.S. fit in?
Well, I think the U.S. at first, at a leadership level, it really should put to lie the arguments that were made over the last decade that it was because of the United States that these kinds of things were happening. What we see now, the broader Arab Spring, for heaven's sake, the United States did not start the Arab Spring. Some of us might have been sympathetic to freedom forces across this area, but it was not instigated by the United States. It's elements within this region. And these activist, dangerous networks seek opportunity in it, and they seek to shape the outcomes. And so I think at a leadership level, we have to step back and say, okay, the political, I think, sideshow of the last decade about it all being about Bush or all being about the United States and cowboy diplomacy, that's bygones. What you see is a very dangerous war declared on civilization as we know it. And as Buck was alluding to, Christians are really getting squeezed out of most of the Middle East as these radical elements increase their presence politically. Think of the Coptics in Egypt. Think of the Christians, as he said, that were in Iraq, same in Syria, other places. This is a broader conflict. We better get serious with our allies. You can't have a postmodern Europe. You can't have an incompetent relationship with Syria and face this kind of uncertainty in this dangerous region.
Buck, you talked about Syria potentially devolving into a sectarian war, and Steve's now talking about the role of Christians in the region. I have to wonder, hasn't it already devolved into a sectarian war? It seems like I've read that Assad's strategy, essentially, that we've seen is he's fallen back to familiar territory, Alawite predominant areas along the Mediterranean shore, and literally started to clear out the cities such as Homs to his eastern border to create a safe haven, get rid of the Sunnis in that area. And then when that's done in turn, I would assume, if the Free Syrian Army takes control, I would assume we'd see something similar in the rest of the country with the Alawites being cleared out. This seems to be an inevitability, if not already happening.
That's been my contention going back months. Well, what I cited today was that the Wall Street Journal is now saying that Syria is devolving into a sectarian fight. And there are more concerns now. I didn't read about it, but it talked about how they're discussing Alawites as minorities who should be wiped out, how they're discussing Christians needing to flee because Syria is for Muslims only. This is coming from the resistance now. You're seeing this reporting. And look, here's my other contention, and I haven't clarified this. I'm not saying that this is the Syrian resistance. I don't think anybody right now who's paying attention says this is a Syrian resistance, but it is there. And in the past, the most dedicated, those who are most willing to employ violence and those who are absolute zealots, Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a very good example of sort of these intra-insurgency politics. They are the minority in the early stages, but they can co-opt, they can coerce, and over time, they can start to hijack what is otherwise a broader resistance movement. And I worry about that happening here. And when you see Christians being kicked out of cities, and you see them talking about Alawites being dogs that need to be executed in the streets, and these are resistance leaders, by the way, and they're growing out the beards, and they're dressing like people in Afghanistan, not people in Syria, then I have major concerns.
So, Buck, now that you have these concerns, and we have these reports, Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, about potential sectarian violence, and what would you suggest be done at this point in time with Syria from our point of view?
I think the most important thing we could do would be to figure out who is the resistance and what are their intentions. Now, can we do that? I don't really know. But I actually think a perfect person to bring in would be Steve. Steve, what do you think? I mean, this has got to be reminiscent of your core issue working for Vice President Cheney, which is Iraq, core national security issue. What do you think should be done here? I mean, now that we know that, one, this is devolving into a civil war, and two, there are some elements here that we're not really comfortable working with, what's the best way forward?
Well, unfortunately, we're playing catch-up because the full tool set that I would really like to have at hand if I was trying to advise our national leadership would be to have the embassy and ambassador we had in place. It's their job to go out and get good information like this. And the ambassador we had in place was doing a fantastic job of trying to get out and mingling with the opposition. I would want to have a really heavy investment in our intelligence and intelligence liaison services. Really, the cutting edge in this is going to be judging what our allies are picking up. So the Turks and others with vested interests. The Saudis also have a vested interest in this. We'd want to have very, very active intelligence liaison work going with them. This is already more than a year and a half in. It's a little late to start amping up on that. The administration talks about pivoting national power towards Asia. As much as I love Asia and find it to be important, the danger in the world right now still is in the Middle East. So I'm not quite sure where the budgetary and strategic focus of our government is. And I think, lastly, I think we really have to look at all forms of support going to, even if it's minority shards of this opposition movement, to try to bolster their capability and try to build out from the branches that we know and can trust until hopefully it grows into a broader, sustainable movement.